Perspective is the way you see something. It's your point of view. It's your opinion. In art, it's where you're standing looking at your subject. Traditionally, artists want to show what's close and what's far away to give the illusion that you can just walk right into that painting or drawing. Perspective sounds really scary. It's not that scary. We actually know most of what we need to know already. We just don't know that we know. I think when we talk and use words like horizon lines and vanishing points or one-point perspective, we panic a little bit, but we'll look at that in a minute. That's only a very small part of what perspective is in art. Colour. The further something is away from us, the more washed out and pale it's going to look. Far away hills look pale blue. The further away, the paler of the colour. Things in the foreground or closest to us look warmer in colour. That principle applies whether you're doing a sweeping landscape or whether you're doing a still life. Generally speaking, what's closest to you looks a little more warm in colour. So that's something that you can exaggerate a little bit if you like. Size. You know, things look smaller when they're far away. This girl's boots look bigger than the boats, but we know they're not. Here, the cat is actually bigger than a building, but we know they're not, because we already know that things look smaller the further they are away from where we're looking at them. Clarity. Things in the distance are less clear, they're softer looking and fuzzier. We sometimes talk about atmospheric perspective. So when you've got atmosphere there, it definitely is much fuzzier the worse further away it gets. If you're doing something like fog or mist, without the foreground that's fairly clear and the fuzziness in the background, I mean, how else are you going to paint something like that? Even clouds have perspective. If they're close to you, they look quite big, and a front on the horizon is going to look tiny. Even water has perspective. The ripples in the water look quite big where they're close to us, and the further away they get from us, they get smaller, or they look smaller, and they look much closer together. Linear perspective is not really something to be afraid of. It's a way to check that your drafting skills are on song. The most important thing in traditional painting is that your eye level stays the same throughout one scene, whether it's a still life or mountain range or a river. As long as your eye level doesn't change, the horizon won't change either. You can't always see a horizon because sometimes it's covered by trees, or it might be so far off in the distance that it's near your neighbour's letterbox or something. I think most of us could look at converging railway lines or roads as they disappear off into the distance. That is called one-point perspective. These things look wider close to us and bigger, and they go narrower further away until they disappear over the horizon or disappear behind trees or buildings. We know that, you know that, you just didn't know that it was called one-point perspective. Well, that's what it is. Let's look at a road and a fence, maybe a railway line. The lines will all go to a vanishing point on the horizon. The angles will be different. They'll all stay at that same vanishing point. They'll all lead to that point, but the angles will be different because they're side by side and not on top of each other. Time to talk about something that's not flat. time to talk about a three-dimensional object. Let's talk about drawing a box. Essentially, a box is a cube. When it comes to drawing a cube, we tend to use what we know, and it gets in the way of what we actually see. So it's what you know versus what you see, and there can't be any compromise with that. You can't try and fit in an extra angle because you know that that's the same size and it's a bit closer to the same size. You would draw that the same way as that you would draw anything. You look for things that are like, and you look for things that are different. Now compare the length of one line to the length of the other line as you see it from your perspective. You might find that a box, the corner that's closest to you, might be look twice as long as the corner that's away from you, depending on your angle. We see a different thing from our perspective is that if the box is right at our eye level, so the sides look fairly flat, there's hardly any angle at all. But when we're looking up at the box, because we're very low, we don't see all the box, we might only see two sides. And then we need to know that those angles, we need to take a guess at them, at where, if you followed that line right to the horizon, and it'll be way off your page, but you know that the top of the box and the bottom of the box are going to meet on the horizon if your draftsmanship is right. If we're looking down on the box, we see a lot of the top of the box. That's if our eye level is above the box, that's our perspective. Buildings in a lot of cases are just big boxes. The whole building will have angles that lead to the same vanishing point if you want to establish an angle. That way, once you've done that, everything within that one building, all the angles will lead to that same vanishing point. So the top of windowsills, bottom of windowsills, top of shutters, bottom of shutters, tops of doors. If there's a flower box, and if you had an imaginary line and it went off into the distance, it would all meet at the vanishing point, the same vanishing point. It will look different depending on where you're looking at it from. So if you're out on a tour and you're in the top deck of a bus and you're looking straight on at a building, that will look a totally different angle than if you're on your back in the gutter on Saturday night looking up at the building. It's going to look a lot different. You might even see two buildings, and that's going to be different if you were in the penthouse of a luxury tower and you were looking down on a little fishing shack or something. These perspectives will be different. When you combine these things that you know about perspective, like the atmospheric perspective, something far away is paler, fuzzier, it looks smaller, things in the foreground are brighter and bigger, or they look that way. And then if you've got a building or something solid there that you want to have, the uprights are going to be fairly upright, and as long as you can take a good guess at one of the angles, and all of the other angles within that structure lead to the same vanishing point, you're going to be very, very credible, and it's you've got a handle on it. You're painting with perspective. That's fantastic. So linear perspective is something you can use. It involves you engaging in using imaginary lines to check that angles are in tune with each other. Of course, not everything is square or a box. Some things are round, and that's a whole new ball game. It's something that is less obvious and something that we may look at in a different video.